you don't work for an airline, then you might not be familiar with the rules around layovers. That time that's officially ours, from the moment we step off that aircraft until we check back in for the flight home. Sometimes it's as little as 10 or 11 hours. Sometimes it might even be up to a week. But what do you think we're doing in that time? Resting? Doing some kind of work, perhaps? Our time dictated to us by those that have sent us there. Well, thankfully, for most of us, that's not really the case. That time is our own, to do with as we please, aside from a fairly loose requirement to be contactable for a short period each day, just in case the plans change. But what does contactable even mean? A quick reply on a WhatsApp group? Being able to answer the phone in your hotel room? If I'm honest, I couldn't actually tell you. But what I can tell you is that most crew tend to make the most of a layover. And if we find ourselves somewhere with more to offer than a hotel bar and an overcrowded pool, then off we may trot in search of adventure, using whatever means happen to be available. Particularly if it's somewhere that we can partake in hobbies and experiences that aren't so easy to enjoy back home. Like the crew in this story. Only that can very occasionally create a problem. Because if most of the crew are away from the hotel and something happens, what happens then?
Doors to armed and cross-check.
Come fly the red eye. Whoa.
Welcome aboard the Red Eye.
A Friday morning in March, circa 2012. Zena quickly checked her emails. It was 6 a.m. Her flight to Los Angeles didn't check in until 11, but this was her usual routine. Get up an hour earlier than she needed to, check her emails, catch up on notices, complete any admin, and generally just clear the decks before heading to work. She hated using a single minute of her days off on company business. After all, they didn't pay her for those days, so why should she spend them checking notices and replying to emails? One message caught her eye, and she recognized the sender's name from the crew list. It was the captain operating her flight that day. Hi guys, I'm thinking of heading up to Big Bear this trip and spending some time on the slopes. I've hired a minibus and currently have 7 spare seats available on a first-come, first-served basis. If you'd like to join me, let me know. The plan is the usual: leave at 4 a.m. on Saturday, stay overnight, then head back early on Sunday after a morning ski, with plenty of time to rest before checkout and the flight home. Hope you can make it, Don. Zena felt a rush of adrenaline as she hastily typed her reply. She loved skiing. When she was younger, she'd gone on every school ski trip she possibly could, even sacrificing Christmas presents so her parents could put the money towards a week in the mountains instead. But since then, adult life had got in the way, and she hadn't been for years. This job really was the gift that kept on giving. She'd joined the airline 11 months before, had loved almost every minute of it, well, apart from a couple of flights, and she'd heard rumours of crews disappearing off to ski resorts during winter layovers. And now, here it was. The opportunity had practically landed in her lap. Or had it nearly passed her by? She glanced at the date on the email. It had been sent 5 whole days ago. 5 days. She quickly started typing. Hi, Don. Absolutely count me in if there's still a spare seat. I'd love to come. See you soon, Zena. She hit send and immediately refreshed her inbox, as though there was some chance Don possessed supersonic fingers and had already replied. Ugh, nothing. She took the final sip of coffee from her mug and headed upstairs. And then she stopped dead, looking at her suitcase which lay open on the bed. It was March in Los Angeles. What on earth was she supposed to pack? Spring clothes? Ski gear? There wasn't really an in-between. For that matter, where even was her ski gear? She definitely still owned it. She was sure of it. Her eyes swept around the bedroom she'd had since she was a teenager. The boxes stacked on top of the wardrobe, the drawers that hadn't been opened in years, the dark gap beneath the bed where countless possessions had been cast aside and forgotten about over the decades. It had to be in here somewhere. She had precisely 1 hour to find it. In the briefing room, the manager stopped mid-sentence while reading from the company notices. Everyone turned as 3 middle-aged pilots stepped through the door. "Morning," said the one with 4 stripes on his shoulders. Zena presumed that was Don. Don, who had sent the email and thrown her entire morning into chaos. Don, who was responsible for the fact her mum was almost certainly going to kill her when she got home and saw the state of both of their bedrooms after she'd pulled them both apart looking for her ski wear. And Don, who still hadn't replied to her email, leaving her sitting in limbo with no idea whether she was actually going skiing or not. He quickly introduced himself, confirming her suspicions, and then introduced the other 2 pilots. They covered the usual briefing points, the weather, the route, and the expected flight time. 10 hours and 20 minutes. And then, finally, he arrived at the subject that actually mattered. Well, to Zena at least. "Right," he said. "Sorry if I haven't replied to everyone yet, but who's up for skiing?" A handful of hands immediately shot up around the room, including hers. Don's head nodded as he looked at each volunteer, counting. 3, 4, 5, 6, he pointed to himself. 7. And then to one of the pilots standing beside him. 8, he smiled. "Perfect. Room for everybody on the bus. We'll sort the final details out on the way over. 4 a.m. start in the hotel lobby tomorrow." Zena couldn't stop smiling. She was going skiing, and she was absolutely certain that, in 11 months of flying to all sorts of incredible destinations, this trip was going to be the best one yet. Well, as long as she didn't hurt herself, fall over and break a leg or something. And now that she thought about it, wasn't it cutting it a bit fine to come back on the day of checkout? Perhaps they really should just spend 1 day there and head back, to play it safe. Her annoying habit of worrying about things that probably weren't going to happen chose that moment to make its customary appearance. She was already uncomfortably close to her sickness trigger after that bout of flu a few months ago, and she was a good skier, so she was unlikely to hurt herself. At least, that's what she told herself as she firmly pushed the thought aside. And if crews usually stayed overnight when they came up here, then it must be perfectly acceptable and safe to do so. No, nothing was going to go wrong. Everything would be fine, wouldn't it? Sunday, midday. Zena settled into the back of the minivan for the long journey home. She could feel her insides glowing with happiness. It had honestly been the best 2 days she'd had in years. Flying down the slopes with the wind in her face, discovering that none of the skills she'd honed as a teenager had deserted her. Or if anything, she was skiing better than ever. In fact, apart from the captain, she was pretty sure she was the best skier there. Not that she'd ever say that out loud, of course. Still, a few people had commented on how capable she was, and she'd happily accepted the compliments. But it wasn't just the skiing. It was the whole experience. The mountains, the crisp air, the way the jet lag had worked entirely in their favour, allowing them to be first on the slopes that morning while the snow was still fresh, powdery and untouched, spraying up around them as they carved through it. Even the beginners had picked it up quickly. The 3 crew members who'd never skied before had become surprisingly competent at snowplough turns and chairlifts by the end of the first morning, gliding down the green runs as if they'd been doing it for years. There'd even been a guy that worked at the ski shop who knew crew and happily had come out with them for a few hours and showed them some tips. And then, of course, there had been the après-ski. The lazy afternoon drinks, when the snow started to turn slippery, tired legs became unreliable and unfortunate skiers began being carried off the slopes nursing injuries, while they watched smugly from a balcony with a Bud Light, content in the knowledge they'd already had the best part of the day. before heading back to the hotel bar with its log fire roaring, waiting to welcome them in from the cold like a warm hug. There'd even been a hot tub where she got to be outside in the freezing air and the warm, bubbly water with champagne in hand. Yep, it had been the best layover she had ever had, and it was going to take some beating. She smiled to herself and gazed out of the window at the mountains looming beyond the edge of the hotel car park. And then she frowned. Where were they? The engine started, and the minivan, snow chains rattling against the tyres, nudged cautiously forward. Zena craned her neck around the seat in front. Don was in the driver's seat, leaning over the steering wheel, his face close to the windscreen as though a few extra inches might somehow help him see through the thick curtain of snow falling beyond it. A pair of dim headlights materialised from the whiteness ahead before disappearing again as soon as they passed them. The visibility was awful. She could see Don's hands gripping the wheel, his knuckles almost white as they edged forward at walking pace. Nobody spoke, but she was fairly certain they were all thinking exactly the same thing. Checkout was at 8 o'clock. The drive normally took 4 hours, and that was assuming they didn't hit traffic outside of Los Angeles. At their present speed, they wouldn't make it. And should they even be driving at all? It'll be fine, she told herself, forcing a small smile and settling back into her seat. She always worried. She couldn't help it. But she was travelling with the captain, and he'd done this countless times before. As soon as they got lower down the mountain, the snow would ease, visibility would improve, and they'd make up the time. She closed her eyes. The plan had been to get some sleep on the journey back, and so that was exactly what she was going to do. They never made it out of the car park. The snow that had been forecast for that afternoon arrived early, and with the full force of nature behind it. 2 hours later, they all sat in the hotel bar, nursing hot chocolates and coffees. Don reappeared at the entrance, walking slowly towards them, his head down. One glance at his face was enough to know there was no change. From where Zena sat, staring through the window, it looked like a full-blown blizzard. The sort you saw on television documentaries where men with snow-covered beards battled their way through drifts up to their knees. She hadn't ventured outside recently, but she suspected their white minivan would now be almost impossible to spot beneath a blanket of snow. Don stopped beside the fire and shook his head. "It's not looking good, folks." Nobody said a word. "By my reckoning, unless we're out of here within the next hour, we're not going to make it back in time." There was silence, and around the circle people exchanged glances. Each of them was doing the same calculation. There were 8 of them stranded on a mountain. 8 crew members, including the pilots. Which meant there were definitely not enough people left back at the hotel to operate tonight's flight home without them. Nobody needed to say it out loud. The consequences were obvious. This was rapidly becoming a very big problem, and a cancelled flight was not something any of them wanted to take the blame for. While nothing in the rules said you couldn't go skiing on a layover, no one doubted there'd be some serious repercussions if they didn't make it back. James, the first officer, looked up from his drink. "Let's give it another half an hour and then try again," he said. "What's the worst that can happen? If we don't get far from the hotel, we can always turn around and walk back. But if we can just get a little lower down on the mountain, hopefully it'll improve from there." A murmur of agreement rippled around the group. Don shrugged. "I think that's probably our only option," he admitted. In 30 minutes, they all headed back out, everyone helping to scrape the fresh snow from the van. Zena said a short prayer as they climbed back into it. One, to firstly ask for help on their mission, and then to give thanks for having packed her warmest boots. The snow was deep, and if they needed to walk back to the hotel, then she'd be more than grateful for them. Someone at the front began singing The Wheels on the Bus, but it landed flat, and they stopped at the first all day long. Outside, James walked alongside and just in front of them, an extra pair of eyes a few feet ahead. Back at the hotel in Los Angeles, the flight manager texted the group chat, and a ping went up in the van as it all hit their phones. "Hope you all had a good time, skiers. What's your ETA?" Marina texted back a picture of the outside. "Hopefully we'll get there," she said, adding snow and crying emojis. "Shit," came the reply. Onward they rolled, slowly, but it was futile. And when they hit something in the road, Don came to a halt, jumping out to investigate. He got back in, a grave look on his face. "We've hit something and we've got a blown tyre. Hopefully we've got a spare." "Damn," someone said. The mood in the van was heavy, and Xena didn't even try to push away her worries. Nope, they were real this time. They had every right to a place in her mind right now, and they had a lot to say. "So, what will happen if we don't get back?" she asked nervously. "They'll have to cancel the flight," someone said. "But what will happen to us?" "Probably get a disciplinary," someone else answered. "But I wouldn't worry too much. They can't sack us unless they sack the captain too, and they won't do that, so I think we're safe." But I'm still in probation until next month," Xena said, feeling the words catch in her throat. No one said a word, but Yanis rubbed her hand gently, in a way that confirmed to her that the safety net of being with the captain probably didn't apply to her. "Fuck," she said eventually, allowing herself a rare swear word. Fuck, she said again. "Everybody off," Don called through the window. "We need to get the weight off to jack it up." "Are you calling us fat?" joked Gary. "The cheek of it," laughed Sue. Xena didn't say a word. Her humour had completely left her. They piled out, standing shivering in the snow, huddled together like penguins, while the two pilots changed the wheel of the minivan. The mood had lightened somewhat as their outlook bleakened, as though acceptance had finally replaced worry in a situation that was almost completely out of their hands. Other than the pilots, of course. But even them, while they could apparently change a wheel, they couldn't dictate the weather. "Right, back on," said James as they finished up, slinging the burst tyre into the back and tightening the chains on the replacement. As he stood upright, he glanced skyward. "Hey, I think it's clearing," he said, a smile spreading across his face. The others stopped in their tracks and looked up. Through the falling snow, there did seem to be a small gap in the cloud, and the flakes themselves were noticeably thinner now than they had been only a few minutes before. "Woohoo!" Amy cheered. A chorus of cheers and whoops followed as everyone scrambled back into the minivan. This time, Don put a little more weight on the accelerator as they pulled away. Visibility had improved to perhaps 20 feet, and although the roads were still treacherous beneath the fresh snow, he drove with the quiet determination of a man operating a snowplow, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his face frozen with concentration. At the back of the bus, the laughter continued. Adrenaline had replaced anxiety, and everyone seemed to be checking and rechecking the time every few minutes. They had a chance. If they could avoid any more delays, they might just make it back in time for the wake-up call. And then they hit traffic. Just outside of Los Angeles, the bus slowed down to a crawl, barely moving faster than when they'd pulled out of the hotel car park hours earlier. They hadn't stopped for food, or even a toilet break. They only had 15 miles to go, and 40 minutes to do it in. "Will you guys make it?" the flight manager texted. "Hopefully," Yanis texted back. What else could they say? They crawled along for 20 minutes until eventually they reached the roadworks that had caused the delay. The moment they were through, everyone was thrown back into their seats as Don buried his foot in the accelerator. Careful, mate, I need a piss, Gary laughed. Don grinned. From where Xena was sitting, she suspected he was quite enjoying the adrenaline rush. The excuse to drive like a boy racer after hours of battling snowstorms, breakdowns and traffic jams. Darting in and out of lanes, they eventually came off the interstate just at the exact moment that their phones would have been ringing in their rooms for wake-up. At each intersection, Don took the bend fast, skidding into corners. Xena looked over her shoulder, checking for police. The possible final hurdle that would make or break this last attempt at saving their bacon. At the hotel, Don swung into the car park and pulled straight into the first available space. "I'll call the hire company and sort it out," he said as everyone piled out, grabbing their bags and sprinting towards the lobby. They had 20 minutes. 20 minutes to get to their rooms, shower if they were brave enough, throw their uniforms on, finish packing, and get back downstairs for pickup. In 5 minutes, the rest of the crew would begin drifting into the lobby, following the usual rule of being there 15 minutes early. Not them, though. They'd need every last minute. They burst into a lift, breathing hard as it climbed floor by floor, stopping to eject crew members at each level. By the time it reached her floor, Xena was almost vibrating with adrenaline. She hurried down the corridor, running past a hotel employee carrying a stack of papers. One of them was sticking out from beneath her door. Frowning, she picked it up while fumbling for her keycard and pushed the door open with her elbow. The letter read, "Apologies for the late notification, but due to a technical issue with your aircraft, your flight has been delayed. New wake-up time is 0600 hours for a 0700 hour pickup. Tomorrow." Xena stopped as the door slammed shut behind her and stared at it, before a burst of laughter left her lips. Her phone immediately began buzzing as the WhatsApp group exploded into life. All that rushing, all that panic, the snowstorm, the puncture, the traffic jam, the race back to the hotel, it had all been for absolutely nothing. She dropped her bag on the floor and sat down on the edge of the bed as the reality slowly sank in. Instead of frustration, though, she felt a strange sense of euphoria. Xena wasn't a risk-taker. In fact, she spent most of her life avoiding risks precisely because she hated worrying about things. But as she replayed the whole trip in her head, from the excitement of the ski trip to the terror of nearly not making it back, she found herself smiling. She had taken the risks, and it had all worked out fine. Would she do it again? Absolutely. Just maybe not until her probation was over. The Red Eye podcast is written by Kaylie Kay, narrated and produced by me, Ali Murphy. These stories are based on true events, but certain details, characters, and timelines have been altered to protect the innocent. Visit our website, theredeyepod.com, to subscribe to our newsletter and to find out details on how you can contribute your story for us to turn into an episode. If you enjoyed listening to our stories, please like, subscribe, and review. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Red Eye podcast. You guys are why we do this. We love the stories that you have, and we love telling you the stories that people share with us. To help us reach more people and get the podcast really out there, we would really appreciate it if you left a review. It just helps our podcast be a little bit more visible. Thank you.